When billionaire tech entrepreneur Marcus Wellington leaves his black card behind after a heated argument with his wife, he expects his longtime housekeeper, Elena, to simply return it. Instead, surveillance footage reveals she's been using it to make purchases that completely challenge everything he thought he knew about the quiet woman who's worked in his Manhattan penthouse for 8 years. What Elena bought with unlimited access to his fortune will force Marcus to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, humanity, and the invisible people who keep his world running. This is a story about unexpected choices, hidden depths, and how sometimes the people we overlook the most are the ones who can teach us what truly matters. Big Bendy, I never thought a piece of plastic could change everything I believed about someone. But there I was, staring at my security monitor at 3 in the morning, watching footage that made absolutely no sense. The black card, my American Express Centurion card that I carelessly left on the kitchen counter after that explosive fight with Victoria about the charity gala. The same card Elena Martinez, my housekeeper of 8 years, had quietly picked up and slipped into her apron pocket while cleaning up the broken wine glass from our argument. I should have been furious. Any rational billionaire would have been calling the police, pressing charges, protecting their assets. Instead, I found myself completely mesmerized by what the transaction alerts on my phone were telling me. Elena had been using my card for 3 days straight, and the purchases were impossible to categorize. It started small. Tuesday morning, 4783 at a local grocery store in Queens. Nothing suspicious there. Maybe she was picking up supplies for the penthouse. But then Wednesday, $1,247 at a medical supply company, $3,200 at a children's clothing store, $890 at a pharmacy, and $15,000 at something called Metropolitan Community Services. By Thursday, the amounts were staggering. $25,000 to Hope Haven Family Center, $18,500 to Brooklyn Emergency Housing, $32,000 to something listed as Rodriguez Medical Fund. I sat in my home office, the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, trying to make sense of it all. Elena Martinez was a ghost in my house, quiet, efficient, invisible. She arrived at 7 every morning, cleaned, organized, prepared meals, and disappeared by 4 in the afternoon. In 8 years, our longest conversation had probably been about whether I preferred my shirts hung by color or by fabric type. She was in her 50s, small and sturdy, with graying hair always pulled back in a neat bun. She spoke English with a soft accent that hinted at her Dominican roots, but only when absolutely necessary. She moved through my 4,000-square-foot penthouse like a shadow, leaving everything perfect in her wake. And now this shadow had somehow spent over $127,000 of my money in 3 days. The smart thing would have been to cancel the card immediately, call my lawyer, handle this like any other case of employee theft. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way Elena had looked that Tuesday morning when I'd stormed out after the fight with Victoria, leaving behind the destruction of our argument, overturned chairs, that shattered baccarat wine glass, the contract for the new Southampton house torn in half. When I'd returned that evening, everything had been pristine, not just clean, but somehow peaceful. Elena had even placed a small vase of fresh white roses on the kitchen island where the chaos had been. She'd never done anything like that before. I pulled up the security footage again, this time focusing on Elena's face when she first spotted the card. The timestamp showed 8:23 a.m. Tuesday. She'd been wiping down the marble countertop when she noticed the black card partially hidden under some scattered mail. She'd paused, looking around as if making sure she was alone. Her hand had hovered over the card for nearly 30 seconds. I watched her face in the high-definition footage, expecting to see calculation, greed, opportunity. Instead, I saw something that looked almost like pain. She'd picked up the card, turned it over in her hands, then looked directly up at one of the security cameras. For just a moment, her usually composed expression cracked, and I saw something raw and desperate in her eyes. Then she'd slipped it into her apron pocket and continued cleaning, as if nothing had happened. Now, 3 days later, I was faced with transaction alerts that read like a charity's wish list rather than a shopping spree. No luxury purchases, No personal indulgences, no designer clothes or expensive jewelry. Just medical bills, housing payments, and children's supplies. My phone buzzed with another alert. $8,700 to St. Mary's Emergency Fund. Then another. $12,400 to Community Food Network. I should have been calling the police. Instead, I found myself getting dressed at 3:30 in the morning, preparing to drive to Queens to get answers from the most enigmatic woman who'd ever worked for me. The drive through the empty streets of Manhattan gave me time to think about what I actually knew about Elena Martinez. She'd been recommended by my previous housekeeper when she retired. Impeccable references. Perfect English, reliable, discreet. She lived in Queens, had worked for wealthy families her entire career, never missed a day, never asked for advances or special favors. She knew my schedule better than I did, anticipated my needs before I expressed them, and maintained my household with a precision that would make a Swiss clockmaker jealous. She'd seen me at my worst, hungover after business trips, raging after bad meetings, celebrating after successful acquisitions. Through it all, she'd remained professionally invisible, which made her current spending spree all the more bewildering. Queens at 4 in the morning is a different world from Manhattan. The streets are quieter, lined with modest houses and small apartment buildings instead of gleaming towers. I'd never been to Elena's neighborhood before, never thought to wonder where she went when she left my penthouse each day. Following my GPS to the address from her employment files, I found myself on a tree-lined street of small, well-maintained homes. Elena's address led me to a narrow 2-story house with a tiny front yard and a chain-link fence. But as I parked across the street, I noticed something that stopped me cold. There were lights on in what seemed like every window of the house. Not the harsh, fluorescent lighting of someone who couldn't sleep, but the warm, golden glow of a home where people were awake and active at an hour when the world should be sleeping. Through the sheer curtains of the front windows, I could see movement, multiple figures moving around what looked like a living room. The front porch had several pairs of shoes lined up neatly, children's sneakers, adult boots, flip-flops in various sizes. This wasn't the home of a single middle-aged housekeeper. This was something else entirely. As I sat in my Tesla, watching the house, a piece of the puzzle began to form in my mind. But it was a piece that didn't fit with anything I thought I knew about the quiet woman who'd been keeping my life organized for 8 years. My phone buzzed again. Another transaction alert. $6,200 to emergency medical transport services. I stared at the notification, then back at the house, where Elena Martinez apparently lived her real life. A life that had somehow intersected with my black card in ways I was only beginning to understand. The truth was, I'd spent 8 years employing someone I'd never really seen. And now, in the middle of a Queen's night, I was about to discover just how blind I'd been. Whatever Elena had been doing with my money, whatever had driven her to risk everything by taking that card, it was connected to this house, these people, this life I'd never bothered to learn about. And somehow, I had the feeling that what I was about to discover would change everything I thought I knew about the invisible woman who knew everything about me. I sat in my car for another 20 minutes watching the quiet activity in Elena's house before I finally worked up the courage to approach the front door. What exactly was I planning to say? "Hello, I'm here about the $130,000 you've stolen from me, but I'm more curious than angry." The walkway to her front porch was cracked concrete, lined with small potted plants that someone had clearly tended with care. As I got closer, I could hear voices from inside, not just Elena's accented English, but multiple conversations happening simultaneously in both English and Spanish. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. Through the thin curtain covering the front window, I caught a glimpse of something that made me freeze. There was a hospital bed in Elena's living room. Before I could process what that meant, the front door opened, and Elena Martinez stood there in a faded floral bathrobe, her usually perfect hair loose around her shoulders. For the first time in 8 years, she looked genuinely surprised to see me. "Mr. Wellington." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "It's 4:30 in the morning. I know what time it is, Elena. I also know about my credit card." Her face went completely pale, but she didn't deny it. didn't make excuses, didn't even look ashamed. Instead, she simply stepped aside and opened the door wider. "You should come in," she said quietly. "You should see." The inside of Elena's house was nothing like I'd expected. The living room had been converted into what looked like a medical facility. The hospital bed I'd glimpsed through the window was occupied by an elderly woman who appeared to be sleeping, connected to monitors and an IV drip. Medical equipment hummed quietly in the corners. But that wasn't what made me stop breathing. There were children everywhere. A girl who couldn't have been older than 6 was curled up on a makeshift bed of cushions and blankets on the floor, clutching a stuffed elephant. 2 boys, maybe 8 and 10, were sleeping on a pull-out couch. In the dining room, I could see more bedding arranged on the floor, where at least 3 more children were resting. "Elena," I said, my voice barely functioning. "What is this?" She was watching my face carefully, as if trying to gauge whether I was about to call the police or run away. "This is my real life, Mr. Wellington, the life you never asked about." An older woman emerged from what I assumed was the kitchen, carrying a steaming mug. She was probably in her 70s, wearing a nurse's uniform that had seen better days. When she saw me, she froze. "Elena, who is this man?" she asked in heavily accented English. "This is my employer, Mrs. Vasquez. Mr. Wellington." Elena's voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Wellington, this is Carmen Vasquez. She's a retired nurse who helps me here." "Helps you do what exactly?" Elena looked around the room, at the sleeping children, at the elderly woman in the hospital bed, at the medical equipment that was clearly expensive and certainly not covered by any insurance these people could afford. "I take care of people who have nowhere else to go," she said simply. Before I could respond, a soft voice called out from the hospital bed, "Elena, ¿quién está aquí?" Elena immediately went to the woman's side, adjusting her pillows with the same gentle efficiency I'd seen her use to arrange flowers in my penthouse. "It's okay, Mama Rosa. Go back to sleep." "This is Rosa Martinez," Elena said, returning to where I stood frozen in the middle of her living room. "My mother-in-law. She has late-stage diabetes and kidney failure. The dialysis treatments alone cost more than I make in 6 months." I stared at the woman in the bed, trying to process what Elena was telling me. "Your mother-in-law, where's your husband?" Elena's expression tightened. "Miguel died 3 years ago. Construction accident. No insurance, no benefits, no compensation. Just medical bills that bankrupted us. And a mother who needed care no facility would accept because we couldn't pay." The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they were forming was overwhelming. And the children? Different situations. Maria's parents were deported last month. She's waiting for her grandmother to get custody paperwork sorted out. The boys, Carlos and David, their mother is in the hospital recovering from surgery she couldn't afford until... Elena paused, looking directly at me. "Until this week, until you used my credit card." "Yes." The simple honesty of her answer hit me harder than any elaborate explanation would have. She wasn't making excuses or trying to justify what she'd done. She was just telling me the truth. If this part of Elena's story is already touching your heart, tell me from which place in the world you're listening to this, and let me know what you think about her choices so far. "Elena, this is..." I gestured around the room, struggling to find words. "This is incredible, but it's also completely illegal. You stole my credit card." "I did." "You've spent over $130,000. $147,000. As of 2 hours ago," she corrected quietly. Mrs. Vasquez had been listening to our conversation while checking on the children. Now she approached us, her weathered face stern. "Elena, you didn't tell me this man was rich," she said, studying me with sharp eyes. "Look at his clothes, his shoes. This watch probably costs more than this whole house." She was right. My casual 4 a.m. outfit, designer jeans, Italian leather jacket, Patek Philippe watch, probably did cost more than most people's annual rent. Standing in Elena's living room, surrounded by sleeping children and medical equipment, I felt absurdly overdressed and completely out of place. "Mrs. Vasquez," I started to say, but she held up a hand. "No, let me speak. Elena is a good woman, the best woman. For 3 years, she has turned this house into a place where people can survive when they have nowhere else to go. She works 16 hours a day, 8 hours keeping your fancy apartment perfect, then 8 more hours here, taking care of people who would die without her. I looked at Elena, who had moved to check on one of the sleeping boys. His forehead was damp with sweat, and she placed a cool cloth there with practiced ease. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "Since Miguel died," Elena answered without looking up from the child. "At first it was just Rosa, but then Maria's family reached out through our church. Then Carlos and David's mother heard about us through the community center. Word spreads in neighborhoods like this, Mr. Wellington. When people are desperate, they find each other. But how have you been paying for all this? Medical equipment, medications, food for all these people?" Elena finally looked at me directly. "I've been using every penny I earned from you and 2 other families I cleaned for. I sold my car, my jewelry, anything of value. I took out loans against the house. I've been borrowing money from loan sharks who charge interest rates that—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Loan sharks?" Mrs. Vasquez answered for her. "Dangerous men, Mr. Wellington. Men who hurt people when they can't pay. Elena owes them $43,000, and they're not patient people." The room suddenly felt smaller, the weight of what Elena had been carrying becoming clear. She hadn't just been taking care of these people out of kindness. She'd been putting herself in real danger to do it. "When I saw your card on Tuesday morning," Elena continued, "after you and your wife had that fight, I thought about everything these people needed. Rosa's dialysis treatment that was overdue, Carlos's asthma medication that costs $800 a month, the loan sharks who were threatening to come here and hurt these children if I didn't pay them back." She paused, looking around at the sleeping figures who had filled her home and her life. "I thought about how you spent more on that 1 bottle of wine that got broken than I make in 2 months, and I made a choice that I knew would probably cost me everything." The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle hum of medical equipment and the soft breathing of sleeping children. I stood there, a billionaire in a borrowed moment of someone else's reality, trying to understand how the quiet woman who arranged my life had been living this entirely different existence. What Elena had done with my money wasn't theft in any traditional sense. It was triage. It was choosing between following the law and saving lives. It was a moral complexity I'd never had to face in my climate-controlled world of profit margins and stock options. And as I looked around her living room turned medical ward and emergency shelter, I realized that Elena Martinez had been teaching me something about wealth that no business school had ever covered. The question now was what I was going to do with this education. I spent the next hour moving through Elena's house like I was touring a foreign country where I didn't speak the language. Mrs. Vasquez had appointed herself as my guide, showing me the reality that existed just 45 minutes away from my Manhattan penthouse, but might as well have been on another planet. The kitchen had been converted into a mini pharmacy. The cabinets were filled with medications organized with the same meticulous care Elena used to arrange my imported coffee pods. Insulin, heart medications, asthma inhalers, antibiotics, hundreds of prescription bottles with labels bearing different names. Elena tracks every dosage, every schedule, Mrs. Vasquez explained, opening a notebook filled with Elena's careful handwriting. She knows more about managing these conditions than most doctors. In the basement, I found something that made my chest tighten. Elena had created a small classroom space with donated desks and chairs. The walls were covered with children's artwork and educational charts. Stacks of workbooks and school supplies filled makeshift shelves. "The children who stay here, they can't always attend regular school." Elena's voice came from behind me. I turned to find her carrying a load of clean laundry. "Immigration issues, no fixed address, parents in the hospital. They fall behind, and then they fall through the cracks entirely. So you teach them?" Mrs. Vasquez was a teacher in El Salvador before she became a nurse. I help with what I can. She began folding tiny clothes with the same precision she used for my Italian shirts. Maria is actually very gifted in mathematics. Carlos loves to read, but he needs glasses we couldn't afford until this week. Yes, I picked up one of the workbooks. It was filled with careful exercises in both English and Spanish, encouraging notes written in Elena's familiar handwriting. The same handwriting that left me notes about my schedule and household needs had been teaching a 6-year-old girl to solve math problems. "Elena, how do you do all of this? Work for me, maintain this house, care for all these people, teach children. There aren't enough hours in the day." She paused in her folding, a small pink dress held against her chest. "You sleep 4 to 5 hours a night, Mr. Wellington. I know because I see your coffee schedule, the lights in your office when I arrive in the morning, the energy drink cans you leave behind. The difference is, you do that to make more money. I do it to keep people alive." The comparison hit like a physical blow. She was right. I regularly functioned on 4 hours of sleep, pushing through exhaustion to close deals, attend meetings, expand my portfolio. But I'd never considered that the same drive and discipline I applied to accumulating wealth could be applied to saving lives. A small voice interrupted my thoughts. "Miss Elena, I had the bad dream again." We turned to see Maria, the 6-year-old, standing at the bottom of the stairs. Her hair was messy with sleep, and she was clutching the stuffed elephant I'd seen her with earlier. She looked at me with curious but wary eyes. "Come here, mi amor," Elena said, immediately setting down the laundry and opening her arms. Maria ran to her, and Elena lifted her easily, holding her with a tenderness I'd never seen in our 8 years of professional interaction. "This is Mr. Wellington," Elena told Maria softly. "He's a friend." Maria studied my face with the serious expression children reserve for adults they're not sure they can trust. "Are you the man who helped Miss Elena buy my glasses?" I looked at Elena, who was watching me carefully. "Yes," I said, though it felt like lying. "I suppose I am." Maria smiled then, a gap-toothed grin that transformed her entire face. "Thank you. Now I can see the numbers clearly. Miss Elena says I'm very good at math." "She's remarkable," Elena said, smoothing Maria's hair. "She does multiplication problems that children twice her age struggle with." "Where are your parents, Maria?" I asked gently. The little girl's expression grew serious. They had to go away for a while. "But Miss Elena says they're working hard to come back to me. And until they do, I get to stay here and learn and help take care of Abuela Rosa," Elena explained over Maria's head. "Maria's grandmother in Puerto Rico is working through the legal system to get custody. It's a complicated process, but we're hopeful. And if it doesn't work out?" Elena's arms tightened slightly around Maria. "Then we'll find another solution. We always do." The certainty in her voice was remarkable. Here was a woman who had been living one crisis away from financial ruin, who had put herself in debt to dangerous people, who had risked her career and freedom by taking my credit card. And she still spoke about finding solutions with absolute conviction. Mrs. Vasquez appeared at the top of the stairs. "Elena, Rosa is asking for her morning medications, and Carlos is running a fever again." "I'll be right up," Elena replied, then looked at me. "Mr. Wellington, you're welcome to stay, but I need to take care of my family." Her family, not her charges, not the people she was helping, not her responsibilities. Her family. I followed them upstairs and watched Elena move through her morning routine with the same efficiency she brought to my penthouse, but with an entirely different energy. She checked Rosa's vital signs and administered medications with the competence of a trained nurse. She took Carlos's temperature and adjusted his breathing treatment. She helped Maria get dressed and ready for their informal school session. Through it all, she maintained a calm, positive demeanor that made everyone in the house feel safe and cared for. This wasn't the quiet, almost invisible presence I knew from my apartment. This was Elena as herself, confident, nurturing, completely in command of a complex situation that would have overwhelmed most people. You want to keep hearing stories like this? Tap the red button that says subscribe. It's free, and it helps me keep sharing. My phone buzzed with another transaction alert. $5,400 to Rivera Physical Therapy Center. Elena noticed me checking the notification. That's for David's mother. She was in a car accident 6 months ago. No insurance, of course. She's been working as a hotel cleaning lady while needing surgery on her spine. The pain got so bad she could barely walk, but she kept working because she had to feed her boys. And now she's getting the medical care she needs. The surgery was successful, but she needs several months of physical therapy to regain full mobility. David and Carlos have been living here so she can focus on recovery without worrying about them. I thought about the $5,400 charge. It was less than I'd spent on my last business dinner, less than Victoria had spent on her handbag last week. For Elena, It represented another calculated risk, another choice between following rules and saving someone's life. "Elena," I said carefully, "what happens when I report the credit card theft? What happens to all of these people?" She stopped what she was doing and looked at me directly. "I've been thinking about that for 3 days, Mr. Wellington. Rosa will probably have to go to a county facility where they can't provide the level of dialysis care she needs. She'll die within a few months." The matter-of-fact way she said it made the words hit harder. "Maria will go into the foster care system while her grandmother's case works through the courts. The chances of them being reunited become much smaller once she's in the system. Carlos and David will go back to living in their car with their mother, who still can't work properly. And you? I'll go to prison, most likely. The amount I've spent qualifies as grand larceny. I'll lose this house, and everyone here will be scattered to whatever inadequate alternatives they can find." She resumed her tasks, as if she hadn't just described the complete destruction of everything she'd built. "But you know what, Mr. Wellington? For 3 days, Rosa got the medical care that's keeping her alive. For 3 days, Maria had glasses and could see clearly. For 3 days, these children slept safely and ate well and learned something new. Sometimes 3 days of dignity and care is worth the price you pay for it." I watched her adjust Rosa's IV with gentle hands, the same hands that had been preparing my meals and organizing my life for 8 years. Elena Martinez had been living 2 completely different existences, and I was beginning to understand that the version of herself she brought to my penthouse was just the shadow of who she really was. The question that was forming in my mind wasn't whether what she had done was technically illegal. It clearly was. The question was whether I was going to be the kind of person who destroyed this woman's mission of mercy for the sake of protecting money I would never miss. Standing in Elena's house, surrounded by the people she had chosen to save, I realized I was facing the most important decision I'd ever had to make, and it had nothing to do with profit margins or market strategies. I left Elena's house at 7 in the morning with more questions than answers and a perspective that felt completely upside down. The drive back to Manhattan gave me 45 minutes to think, but my mind kept circling back to the same impossible reality. The woman I'd employed for 8 years had been running what amounted to an underground medical facility and safe house, and she'd been doing it with the same quiet competence she brought to managing my household. By the time I reached my penthouse, Victoria was already up, sitting at the kitchen island with her laptop open and a green smoothie that probably cost more than Elena spent feeding her entire extended family for a day. "You're up early," she said without looking up from her screen. "Or did you even come home last night?" "I came home. I left again around 4. 4 in the morning? Marcus, what's going on? You've been acting strange since that argument Tuesday night." I stood there looking at my wife of 12 years, trying to figure out how to explain what I'd discovered. Victoria lived in the same world I did. Charity galas where we wrote checks for tax deductions, board positions at prestigious foundations, carefully managed philanthropy that looked good in business magazines. How could I explain Elena's raw, desperate, beautiful form of caring? "Do you ever think about Elena?" I asked instead. Victoria looked up, genuinely puzzled. "Elena? Our housekeeper? Why would I think about Elena? She's worked here for 8 years. She knows our schedules, our preferences, our habits better than we know them ourselves. Do you know anything about her life outside this apartment?" "Marcus, it's 7 in the morning. I have a conference call with the foundation board in an hour, and you're asking me about the help." Victoria's tone carried that particular edge that meant she thought I was being ridiculous. "What's brought this on?" I poured myself coffee from the machine Elena had programmed to start automatically at 6:45 every morning, because she knew my routines better than I did. "I found out she has a sick mother-in-law who needs dialysis. She's taking care of several children who have nowhere else to go. She's essentially running a one-woman social services operation out of her house in Queens. That's very noble of her, I'm sure. But what does that have to do with us?" The casual dismissal in Victoria's voice crystallized something I'd been feeling since leaving Elena's house. This was exactly the attitude that had allowed me to employ someone for 8 years without ever seeing her as a complete human being, with her own struggles and complexities. "She took my credit card, Victoria, the one I left here Tuesday night after our fight. She's been using it to pay for medical treatments and housing and food for these people." Now I had Victoria's full attention. She closed her laptop and stared at me. "She stole your credit card? Marcus, please tell me you've already called the police. I haven't. Why not? How much has she stolen? About $150,000 as of this morning. Victoria's face went completely white. $150,000? Marcus, are you insane? Call the police right now. Call our lawyer. This woman has been stealing from us under our own roof. It's not that simple. Yes, it absolutely is that simple. Employee theft is employee theft, regardless of whatever sob story she's told you. Victoria stood up, pacing now. God, Marcus, I can't believe how naive you're being. Of course she has a sick relative and children to support. That's probably exactly what she tells every wealthy family she steals from. The accusation hit me wrong, partly because I could see Victoria's point, but mostly because I'd seen Elena's house, met the people she was caring for, witnessed the exhausting reality of her double life. You should see her house, Victoria. You should see what she's actually doing with the money. I don't need to see anything. The only thing that matters is that she stole from us. End of story. My phone buzzed with another transaction alert. Traitu had $200 to Downtown Medical Diagnostics. I showed Victoria the notification. She's still using it, right now. Why, you know. Victoria grabbed her phone. I'm calling the police myself if you won't. Wait. I caught her wrist gently. Just wait. Let me think about this. Think about what? Marcus, this isn't a philosophy class. This is crime and punishment. She committed a crime. She gets punished. Why is this complicated? Because it was complicated. Because Elena had shown me a version of wealth and poverty, of moral choice and human need that didn't fit into the neat categories I'd been living with my entire adult life. What if, I said carefully, instead of calling the police, we helped her? Victoria stared at me like I'd suggested we donate all our money to charity and move to a commune. Helped her? Marcus, she's a thief. She's a woman who was watching people die because they couldn't afford medical care, and she had access to money from someone who would never miss it. That doesn't make it right, doesn't it? The question hung in the air between us. Victoria sat back down, studying my face with an expression I'd never seen before. Marcus, what has gotten into you? This isn't like you at all. She was right. This wasn't like me. The old Marcus would have called the police immediately, pressed charges, probably sued Elena for good measure. The old Marcus would have seen this as a simple case of employee betrayal and protected his assets without a second thought. But something about seeing Elena in her real environment, surrounded by the people she'd chosen to save, had shifted something fundamental in how I understood the world. My phone rang. Elena. Victoria grabbed my arm as I reached to answer it. Don't talk to her until we've decided what we're doing. But I was already answering. Elena, Mr. Wellington? Her voice was steady, professional, exactly the tone she'd used for 8 years when calling about household matters. I wanted to let you know that I won't be coming into work today, or any day after this. Elena, wait. I'm calling from the precinct, actually. I turned myself in an hour ago. I've confessed to the theft and provided them with documentation of every purchase I made with your card. They're processing the paperwork now. I felt like someone had knocked the wind out of me. You turned yourself in. Victoria was making frantic gestures, mouthing, "Put it on speaker," but I ignored her. I realized last night that I'd put you in an impossible position, Elena continued. You're a good man, Mr. Wellington, but you're also a businessman. I couldn't ask you to choose between doing what's legally right and letting me continue to care for these people. So I made the choice for you. Elena, this is insane. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Rosa, Maria, the boys, they'll be okay. Mrs. Vasquez has connections with other families in the community. It won't be perfect, but they'll survive. And you can go back to your life without having to decide whether you're the kind of person who destroys someone else's life to protect money you don't need. The line went quiet for a moment, and I could hear voices in the background, official-sounding conversations about processing and paperwork. Elena, which precinct are you at? Mr. Wellington, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I left my keys and a complete inventory of your household on the kitchen counter. Everything is exactly as you like it. Elena, thank you for 8 years of steady employment, and thank you for giving me 3 days to do something that mattered. She hung up. I stood there holding my silent phone, staring out the windows at the Manhattan skyline that suddenly looked completely different than it had an hour ago. Victoria was watching me with an expression that mixed concern with something that might have been fear. What comes next is even stronger. And to not miss the ending, tap the subscribe button now. It's free, and you'll be with me in every new story. Marcus, she said carefully, what are you thinking? I was thinking about Elena sitting in a police station, accepting responsibility for crimes that were technically illegal but morally complex. I was thinking about Rosa Martinez dying in a county facility because she couldn't afford proper dialysis. I was thinking about Maria going into foster care and losing her chance to be reunited with her grandmother. I was thinking about two little boys going back to living in a car with their injured mother. I was thinking about the fact that Elena had just sacrificed herself to save me from having to make a difficult moral choice. And I was thinking that maybe for the first time in my adult life, I was ready to make that choice anyway. I'm thinking, I said slowly, that I need to go to Queens. Queens? Why? Because Elena Martinez just taught me something about wealth that I never learned in any boardroom. And I'm not going to let her sit in jail for it. I was already moving toward the door, grabbing my keys, my wallet, my phone. Victoria called after me, but I was already gone, heading back to a place where I'd learned that sometimes the most important decisions aren't about profit and loss. They're about who you choose to be when no one is keeping score but your own conscience. The Queen's Precinct was nothing like the sterile corporate environments where I usually conducted business. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on worn linoleum floors. The smell of stale coffee and industrial disinfectant filled the air, and every surface looked like it had been designed for function over comfort. I approached the front desk, where a tired-looking sergeant was processing paperwork. I'm here about Elena Martinez. She was brought in this morning for credit card theft. The sergeant looked up, taking in my expensive clothes and obvious discomfort with the surroundings. You're the victim. I'm Marcus Wellington. Yes, it was my credit card. She's being processed now. You'll need to speak with Detective Morrison about pressing charges and victim impact statements. Actually, I said, the words feeling strange as they came out. I'm here to drop the charges. The sergeant's pen stopped moving. Drop the charges? I don't want to prosecute. I want Elena Martinez released immediately. Sir, that's not exactly how this works. She confessed to grand larceny. The state can still pursue charges even if you don't cooperate, especially with the amount involved. A voice behind me cut through our conversation. Mr. Wellington? I turned to see a middle-aged detective with graying hair and intelligent eyes. I'm Detective Morrison. I was just interviewing Ms. Martinez. This is unusual. What's unusual? Well, for starters, she walked in here voluntarily and confessed to stealing $153,000. Most people don't turn themselves in for felonies. And now the alleged victim shows up wanting to drop charges. Detective Morrison studied my face carefully. Mind if we talk privately? He led me to a small interview room that smelled like fear and regret. The walls were bare, except for a clock that ticked loudly and a one-way mirror that made me feel like I was being watched. So, Detective Morrison said, settling into his chair, Elena Martinez tells me she's been your housekeeper for 8 years. Clean record, no prior arrests, pays her taxes, active in her community. Then suddenly she steals your credit card and goes on a spending spree. Except when I look at the spending pattern, it's not jewelry and vacations. It's medical bills and children's supplies. You've seen the charges. I've seen them. Hospital payments, dialysis treatments, emergency housing, food programs. This isn't your typical theft pattern, Mr. Wellington. This looks like someone trying to save the world, one credit card charge at a time. I leaned back in the uncomfortable plastic chair. Have you met the people she was helping? Not yet, but I plan to. Part of due diligence, though Ms. Martinez has been very forthcoming about where every dollar went. He pulled out a thick folder. She brought documentation with her. Receipts, medical records, correspondence with various social services agencies. I've been doing this job for 23 years, and I've never seen a more organized confession. She documented everything, including a letter explaining her actions and a complete accounting of how she planned to pay you back. Detective Morrison opened the folder and pulled out several pages covered in Elena's careful handwriting. She was planning to sell her house, liquidate her retirement savings, and work out a payment plan for the remainder. She estimated it would take her about 15 years to pay you back in full. 15 years. Elena had been prepared to spend the rest of her working life paying back money she'd used to save other people's lives. Detective, what happens if I refuse to press charges? Well, like I said, the state can pursue charges independently, especially for felony amounts. But realistically, without a cooperative victim, it becomes much harder to get a conviction. The district attorney's office has limited resources. They focus on cases they can win. And if I not only refuse to press charges but actively support Elena's release? Detective Morrison leaned forward, interested. That would be very unusual. You're talking about publicly supporting someone who, by her own admission, stole a significant amount of money from you. What if I told you I authorized those expenditures? Did you? I thought about Elena picking up my credit card from the kitchen counter. The look of desperate hope in her eyes when she glanced up at the security camera. Not explicitly, but I'm authorizing them retroactively. Detective Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying me with cop's eyes that had probably seen every kind of human behavior imaginable. Mr. Wellington, can I ask you something? What's your net worth? The question caught me off guard. I'm sorry? Humor me. Rough estimate. I shifted uncomfortably. Why is that relevant? Because I'm trying to understand whether $150,000 is pocket change for you or a significant loss. The honest answer was that $150,000 was less than I'd made in interest while sleeping last night. My investment portfolio fluctuated by more than that amount on a daily basis. But saying that out loud felt obscene in this context. It's not a significant financial loss, I admitted. I figured, which makes Elena Martinez's guilt even more interesting. She turned herself in for stealing money that you probably wouldn't have missed if she'd never told you about it. Before I could respond, there was a knock on the door. Another officer poked his head in. Detective, there's a situation in the waiting area. Bunch of people hear about the Martinez case. Some kind of support group. Detective Morrison and I exchanged glances. Support group. Family members, looks like. Couple of kids, elderly woman in a wheelchair, woman with a walker. They're asking about visiting the suspect. My heart started racing. Rosa, Maria, did they bring the children here? You know them. I met them this morning. They're the people Elena was helping. Detective Morrison stood up. This I have to see. Mr. Wellington, you want to come meet Elena's extended family? We walked out to the precinct's waiting area, and I felt my chest tighten. Mrs. Vasquez was there, looking fierce and determined despite being in an unfamiliar, intimidating environment. Rosa Martinez was in a wheelchair, still connected to a portable IV, looking frail but alert. Maria was holding tight to Mrs. Vasquez's hand, her new glasses slightly crooked on her small face. Carlos and David flanked them, trying to look brave but clearly scared. When Maria saw me, she broke away from the group and ran over. Mr. Wellington, did you come to help Miss Elena too? The adults looked at me with a mixture of hope, suspicion, and desperation. Mrs. Vasquez spoke first. You're the man whose card Elena used? Yes. Are you here to make sure she goes to prison? The question was direct, challenging, delivered with the kind of strength that comes from a lifetime of fighting for people who can't fight for themselves. No, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I'm here to take her home. Rosa Martinez spoke for the first time, her voice weak but clear. Elena told us about you. She said you were a good man, but that she had put you in an impossible position. Elena was wrong about one thing, I replied. It's not an impossible position. It's actually a very clear choice. Detective Morrison was watching this exchange with fascination. Mr. Wellington, I need to understand your intentions here. Are you dropping charges or aren't you? I looked around the waiting room at these people who had become Elena's family, people she had risked everything to protect. I thought about Elena sitting in a cell somewhere in this building, accepting responsibility for the crime of caring too much about human suffering. I'm not just dropping charges, Detective. I want to make a formal statement that every purchase Elena Martinez made with my credit card was done with my full knowledge and authorization. I want it clear that no theft occurred. Mr. Wellington, Detective Morrison said carefully, you understand that making false statements to police is also a crime. I'm not making a false statement. I'm making a choice about how I interpret the facts. Mrs. Vasquez stepped forward, studying my face with sharp eyes. Why would you do this? What do you get out of protecting Elena? It was a fair question, and I found myself thinking about it seriously for the first time. What was I getting out of this? I get to find out who I really am, I said finally. I've spent my whole adult life accumulating wealth and power, but I've never had to decide what kind of person I am when it really matters. Elena gave me that opportunity. If you're feeling this emotional connection to the story, tell me from which place in the world you're listening to this. I'd love to know how this part of Elena's journey is affecting you. Maria tugged on my jacket. Does this mean Miss Eleanor can come home with us? Yes, I said, looking directly at Detective Morrison. That's exactly what it means. Eleanor walked out of the precinct 2 hours later, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, but with her dignity intact. When she saw all of us waiting for her, me, Mrs. Vasquez, Rosa in her wheelchair, the children, she stopped in the doorway and covered her face with her hands. You all shouldn't be here, she said, her voice muffled. Mr. Wellington, why didn't you just let them process the charges? Maria broke away from the group and ran to Elena, wrapping her small arms around Elena's waist. We came to bring you home, Miss Elena. Elena picked Maria up, holding her tightly, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw tears in her eyes. Mi amor, you should be in school. Mrs. Vasquez said this was more important than math today, Maria replied seriously. Elena looked at me over Maria's head. Mr. Wellington, what did you do? What I should have done 8 years ago, I said. I paid attention. The ride back to Queens was surreal. I'd called for a medical transport van to accommodate Rosa's wheelchair and IV equipment, and I found myself in the back of it with Elena's extended family, listening to conversations in Spanish and English about grocery lists, medication schedules, and homework assignments. Normal family conversations that happened to take place around medical equipment and between people connected by circumstances rather than blood. Elena sat next to Rosa, holding her mother-in-law's hand and whispering reassurances. Mrs. Vasquez was quizzing Carlos and David on their reading assignments. Maria had fallen asleep against my shoulder, still clutching her stuffed elephant. Mr. Wellington, Elena said quietly, we need to discuss repayment. I know what I did was wrong, regardless of your reasons for not pressing charges. I have a plan. Elena, stop. No, I need to say this. I can sell the house, liquidate everything I have. I'll pay you back every penny, even if it takes the rest of my life. What if I told you I had a different proposal? She looked at me warily. What kind of proposal? What if, instead of you paying me back, we formalized what you're already doing? What if we turned your house into an official community support center? The van got very quiet. Even Mrs. Vasquez stopped quizzing the boys and turned to listen. I don't understand, Elena said. I've been thinking about this all morning. You've essentially created a model for community-based care that's more effective than any official program I've seen. You're providing medical support, housing assistance, childcare, and education to people who fall through every other safety net. Mr. Wellington, what are you saying? I'm saying I want to fund it properly. I want to turn Elena Martinez's house into the Elena Martinez Community Care Center. I want to hire Mrs. Vasquez as the head nurse. I want to bring in qualified teachers for the children. I want to install proper medical equipment and create a sustainable system for helping people exactly the way you've been doing. Rosa Martinez spoke up, her voice stronger than it had been all day. You want to pay Elena to do what she's already been doing for free. I want to pay her to do what she's been doing, but with proper resources, legal backing, and professional support. I want to take what she's built and make it permanent. Elena stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Mr. Wellington, that would cost less than I spend on my vacation house that I use 3 weeks a year, I finished. Elena, do you have any idea what the operating budget would be for a facility like this? Properly funded, fully staffed, legally established? No, I've never thought about it in those terms. Neither had I until today. I spent the morning making phone calls to lawyers, accountants, and nonprofit specialists. We could establish a proper foundation, hire qualified staff, and create a replicable model for community-based care. The initial setup cost would be about $2 million. Annual operating expenses would be maybe $800,000. Mrs. Vasquez whistled low. That's a lot of money. It's not actually. It's less than I made while we were having this conversation. I looked around the van at these people who had become my teachers in the span of 12 hours. The difference is, this money would do something that matters. Eleanor was quiet for a long time, studying my face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Mr. Wellington, why would you do this?" "Really?" It was the same question Mrs. Vasquez had asked at the police station, and I'd been thinking about it all day. Why was I ready to completely restructure my understanding of wealth and responsibility based on one night in Elena's house? "Because you showed me something I'd never seen before," I said finally. "You showed me what wealth is actually for." Maria stirred against my shoulder, mumbling something in her sleep about multiplication tables. Carlos and David were arguing quietly about whether Superman could beat Batman. Rosa was dozing in her wheelchair. Mrs. Vasquez was making notes in a small notebook about medication schedules. This was what Elena had been protecting. Not abstract concepts of charity or social responsibility, but real people with specific needs and individual stories. She had seen human suffering and responded with human compassion, using the tools available to her, even when those tools belonged to someone else. "Elena," I said, "I have a confession to make." She looked up, alert. "For 8 years, you've been invisible to me. You kept my life running perfectly, anticipated my needs, managed my household, and I never once wondered about your life outside my apartment. I treated you like a very sophisticated appliance. Mr. Wellington, let me finish. You had every reason to resent me, to take advantage of me, to see me as just another wealthy employer who didn't care about anyone but himself. Instead, you took my forgotten credit card and used it to save people's lives. You could have bought yourself anything, disappeared to another country, started over somewhere else. Instead, you spent every penny on other people and then turned yourself in to protect me from having to make a difficult choice. The van had pulled up to Elena's house, but no one was moving to get out. You taught me that wealth without purpose is just hoarding. You taught me that privilege without responsibility is just selfishness. And you taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is pay attention to the people you've been trained not to see." Elena was crying now, not trying to hide it anymore. "Mr. Wellington, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let me help you help them," I replied, gesturing to the people who had filled her house and her heart. "Say you'll let me be part of something that actually matters." Mrs. Vasquez had been listening to this entire exchange with the expression of someone evaluating a business proposal. Now she spoke up. "Mr. Wellington, if we do this thing, this foundation, Elena is in charge. Not you, not some board of rich people who don't understand what we do here. Elena." "Absolutely. And we don't change what works just because you have more money to throw at it." "Agreed. And if you ever decide you're bored with helping poor people and want your money back, we have guaranteed funding for at least 10 years. Make it 20, Mrs. Vasquez smiled for the first time since I'd met her. "Then welcome to the family, Mr. Wellington." As we helped Rosa out of the van and back into the house that had become a sanctuary for people with nowhere else to go, I realized that everything I thought I knew about success, wealth, and purpose had been completely restructured in the span of 24 hours. Elena Martinez had stolen my credit card and in the process had given me something much more valuable than money, a clear understanding of what kind of person I wanted to be. 6 months later, the Elena Martinez Community Care Center was serving 43 people, had a waiting list of over 200, and was being studied by social workers and policy experts as a model for community-based care. Elena had been featured in Time magazine as one of their heroes of everyday America. Mrs. Vasquez had been hired as the center's head nurse and was training volunteers from across the city. Maria's grandmother had successfully gained custody, but Maria still spent her afternoons at the center, helping with the younger children and working on advanced mathematics with a volunteer tutor from Columbia University. Carlos and David's mother had fully recovered from her surgery and had been hired as the center's administrative coordinator. Rosa Martinez lived for another year and a half, surrounded by the people she loved, receiving the care she needed with her dignity intact. And me? I learned that the most expensive education I'd ever received had cost me exactly $153,000 and had been taught by a woman who saw wealth as a tool for healing rather than hoarding. Elena still keeps my schedule, still manages my household, still maintains my life with the same careful attention to detail she always has. The difference is that now I pay attention to hers too, because I finally learned that the most important transactions aren't the ones that make you richer. They're the ones that make you human. If this story moved you, share with me from which corner of the world you followed Elena's incredible journey. Your support keeps stories like this alive.